Hello, this is the Net Hero podcast. I'm Sumit Bose, and this podcast is all about business and doing better for the planet. It's not an eco podcast, we're not green warriors. We believe that business is good and business will make the difference, but it's about holding businesses to account. So if you're interested in what we're doing to try and make things better, to stop our polluting of the planet, to stop our global warming, to stop us driving around in cars that are polluting the air that we breathe, this is the podcast for you. It's all about business, it's about invention, it's about entrepreneurs, scientists, and frankly, there's a few wild cards as well. Do hope you enjoy listening to this episode, and make sure you subscribe and follow us on your social media platforms. And please check out our two news websites, energylivenews.com and Future Net Zero. On with the show. Now, solar has had a real boom, obviously in the UK, for a good 10 years or so. But actually, let's face it, the weather's pretty shit here, right? And it's always cloudy, and what is the point? Oh, look, I take the piss a bit. But yes, solar has a role to play. But it has a much bigger role to play in places where it's hotter, where it's more sunny. And Africa is one of those places where solar could basically do so much to decarbonize their systems. So what's happened with solar in Africa? Many of you probably seen the podcast and stories done over the years, and it's kind of always like a little bit of solar here and there, the odd solar lamp. But actually, could it be on the verge of a big revolution? Well, today I'm joined by someone who knows a lot about it. He is from Africa. He's based in Grantham, though, the home of Margaret Thatcher and Isaac Newton, and he's a bit of a genius on that level. So my delight to say that the guest this week is Wale. Now, I'm going to get this right. Aboyade. How's that?
Yeah.
Near enough?
Yeah.
And you're from a company called Sun King, Wale, correct?
Yes.
Just before we start, Sun King, what does it do?
So Sun King is an off-grid solar company.
Yeah.
We design, manufacture, distribute, and finance affordable solar kits. And that's an important point to make because the solar industry generally, in the way that people actually make the products, is fragmented. You have people who make solar panels that are generally different from those who make solar inverters and batteries. And these are the main components that come together to allow you to produce solar energy. And what Sun King does is that we're able to bundle all of that in almost a plug and play kit, particularly households in emerging economies can use, and sometimes they can even self-install it, but we have installers that install, but they can plug it and play and they can get, energy to meet their demands where they are.
So the system, if we, for people who are listening and watching, how would you describe it? Is it like, everyone knows what a solar panel looks like, right? So let's say it's a meter or 2 meters, whatever it is. But the inverter, the battery, are they the size of a suitcase? Are they like the size of a piano? What sort of setup would you have for a small house?
So we actually have a really wide range of products. Sun King, when it actually started with solar lanterns. And these are really small kits that are smaller than a suitcase. Yeah. In fact, they could be, the size of a small power bank, sometimes with a lamp on the end of it. Right, where you have this really small solar panel that's that big, some 1 or 2 watts, and then the power light. And then, just to be able to solve the lighting problem was where we started. But very soon afterwards, we understood that, the demand for power goes beyond lighting. So we started to make slightly bigger systems. So you then have some systems that are where the panels are, as big as like 2 suitcases put together. Yeah. And then it comes with a really small inverter and battery system bundled together that is, the size of a small, let's say, laptop or something.
Okay. So they're not massively intrusive. That's what I'm trying to get to. They're not like really difficult.
They are not intrusive at all. Yeah, people can literally. So we have even slightly bigger systems now. Home Plus Max, we call it, where you could actually take the inverter and the battery. They're portable. You can carry them around, and these are strong enough to be able to power your laptop, power a small microwave, power a fridge, even. Yeah. And we have customers who then use it in their shops, for example, to power their commercial enterprise, if they're selling goods, and then when they're done in the evening, they bring that same system home to just power their home.
Brilliant. Let's talk about where are you from in Africa?
So I'm Nigerian. From the southwest of Nigeria.
So Nigeria's had a massive glut of energy, right? It's one of the countries that's got a lot of natural resources. And if you look at the majority of Africa, it is still a very much a fossil fuel based economy, right? Why is it, as I said in the intro, that solar, even though it's been around kind of, we were writing stories about solar lamps like you talked about in Africa about 15, 20 years ago, and everyone's saying this off grid solar is going to revolutionize everything, but it hasn't taken off as much. So before we talk about what's happening now, why do you think there's been this lag? Is it because governments have been, like yours, going for the oil and gas resources they have? Is it because just the economics of it? Why do you think it hasn't taken off as much as many experts predicted?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Summit. And as with most things, there's a lot of factors, but I think I would touch on, I would say what I think are the major ones. And also the answer differs from country to country, right? You have
Of course. Yeah, yeah. Africa is not homogenous.
exactly, but Nigeria, for example, is oil and gas rich. So
Of course.
yes, the energy system is heavily oil and gas dominated. But then you have on the other side countries like Kenya that actually have very high renewable energy from geothermal and hydros.
Yes. Yes.
But using, I'm Nigerian and, Nigeria, talking about fossil fuel, Nigeria is a very good case in point. I think that for a long time, there was this, on the one side, I would say there was the issue that solar systems are still expensive 15 years ago compared to other forms of energy.
Yeah.
So the technology trends and the cost reductions that we've seen, like way over 90% in the last 10 years alone, has been one big driver that has made solar systems way more affordable. Now, way back then, as you were saying it, that when this optimism was there, solar was still expensive.
Yes. Yes.
But people thought that one of the reasons for the optimism is people looked at the gap in electrification from this larger grid systems, mostly powered by fossil fuels in the case of Nigeria, and look how long it was taking to connect people, right? Nigeria had independence, 60 years ago in the 1960s. There's no reason why it should be taking 60 years to connect everyone, but it was. All right.
Yeah.
And so there's a question of, okay, if this is taking too long, why don't we productivize electricity access? Because if you think about how a national grid is extended, you have this massive power plant somewhere, in the middle of nowhere, and then you have your big transmission lines, and then, you bring it to the cities, and then you have to sort of like stretch out either underground or overhead the distribution lines to get to homes. And that's really expensive and, time consuming and so on.
Yeah.
But when you now look at a solar system, it's pretty much like a product. Like I said, it's like it's just one small kit that you can just deliver in someone's home. And you don't have to worry about the whole right of way. You don't have to worry about digging any roads. You don't have to worry about all of that stuff. You just give someone a product. So that was what was exciting at the time, that look, we could, if you go to any village in Africa,
Yeah,
you could find
exactly.
all sorts of products. You can
Yeah.
find Coca-Cola there. You can find cigarettes there. So, you could easily use the same delivery model to then do upgrade solar, was the thinking. But like I said, the cost at the time was still high. And most governments were still uncomfortable with the idea that, you could just do this.
This is it. This is the point I'm trying to get to, which is, would you say it's fair to say, and not just your country, but across, there's been a reluctance at the regulatory, at the political level to do, even though the technology is there, they've kind of gone, hang on a second, the oil and gas or whatever, we're going to use it, or there are deals in place with people still providing a lot of money for supplying oil and gas.
Yeah, there is definitely that. But some of it also, to be fair to them, also comes from, a genuine developmental concern that, that Africans need more than just lighting, right? Is it just enough to actually light a home? You need to be able to have the amenities that the average home has, right? If you say, you would have heard the stats that the average American, their fridges uses in a day what some African households use in a year, that sort of thing. And how do you improve of that if you're still just giving people lights and just the small solar lanterns? So there was a little bit of a feeling that, and not just governments, but even shared by some development actors as well, including myself back in the day, that this is a cop out for government. Instead of government to do the hard work of actually extending the grid that can give people real substantive power so they can be aspirational, they can do whatever they need to do. They're being given this small electricity light, pardon the pun, version of things. So there was a little bit, but you're right that there was also, there was the cabal, there's the establishment that also was telling governments, hey, you don't need to listen to those renewable energy guys. You don't
Exactly.
need to listen to those activists. They don't know what's going on. Trust us. We will work with you. We'll give you all the power that you need. But they haven't. And
Mm.
the truth is, half of Africans still don't have, on average, 600 million people still don't have a connection to electricity as we speak. So clearly the old model is not working.
It's ridiculous because, my son recently went to Kenya and, he said, my God, it's just the same. People have this stupid idea of what Africa was, and it's not like that. But there is, very similar to India, there is still, even though India's got this enormous infrastructure and masses of money and everything, there are still people that are cut off, that don't have power. And I wondered whether you feel that this kind of, whether you'd call them an underclass or people who are just being neglected, they just never seem to get it, right? When there is the capability to do it, there is, whether you fund, like you say, the traditional cables or whether you use the battery systems. Why is it that poor people in parts of Asia and parts of Africa are still denied the power? Well, because it's available, isn't it? You could get it to people.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it is one of those things that I say, it is sad that it is the situation, but on the positive note,
Yeah,
it is changing. It is
right.
changing everywhere we go. Nigeria being a case in point, where historically, oil and gas dominated, but right now, Nigeria is installing more solar home systems to these families faster than almost every other African country, I think, except for Kenya. And
Wow.
very soon, probably Q1 next year, Nigeria will overtake Kenya in terms of the monthly installations that happen every month. And this is backed by government policy where they're like, yeah, this is what we're going to do now.
Yeah.
We get it. We know we can't wait for this sort of like old system. We need to embrace new technology, especially with how the prices come down.
Yes.
Especially also the part to mention is that the technology now just goes beyond providing basic lighting, right? Because solar is much cheaper. We don't have to just use it for only lighting. We have the systems that can provide basically all the energy that a household needs, and even energy for small businesses
Yeah, that was brilliant. Yeah.
that can use, small businesses that run fridges, small businesses that are, imagine a tailor or, someone that has a shop. They all need energy for different things. Solar can do that now much cheaper than the grid can. And the government has embraced that.
Let's just paint a picture of this because if you look at it, say you go somewhere, forget the cities, right? People are connected in the cities, done, right? They've got electricity, whether it is renewable or whether it's traditional. You go to a village in the middle of somewhere, there's nothing there, right? Would your system, you could come in and you can fit the panels, like you said, but would you then have to run cables and create plug points so that people can bring things and plug them in? Because I assume that infrastructure probably isn't there as much either, is there? The actual cabling and plug points, or do they all plug into the actual unit? How does that work?
So it depends on the system that we have. Many of our systems, again, we designed it for households that specifically, like you said, don't actually have any wiring because they've never been connected to
Of course.
electricity.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
there's, millions of households that is still like this. And so when you're thinking about providing a solar, you do have to think about this point. So it's a really good point. And many of them can afford it. In fact, this is what one of the unfortunate ironies of even grid connected, the large
Yeah.
scale grid extension, is that governments will spend a lot of money to extend the grid to these households. But the households themselves, because they can't afford to wire their houses,
That's exactly what I was going to say.
they can't afford to
Yeah,
connect to the grid. The grid is right there, right? But they just can't afford the connection fees.
yeah.
They can't afford, hiring an electrician to come and put in all the conduit wiring in their houses for, the lighting in each room and the plugs and the sockets and whatever. Because as you can imagine, that's not cheap, right?
No.
Overall, especially if you're really low income. And that's some of the beauty of our systems is that we actually design our solar kits to already come with lights and cables
Right.
sold with the system. And, show you a picture of this. So some of our basic systems will come with 4 lights or 5 lights. So if you can have a light in each room and they come with switches on them and you can just easily tape them on the wall. So you don't have to drill your wall. You don't have to do anything like that. You just buy the system with the lights and with the charging points for like your phones. So it really addresses this issue that you said. And you don't have to pay for it upfront. You can pay for it gradually as sort of like you can afford. Whenever can afford to pay, you stop payment. And, for that time, you don't have power. As soon as you have some money again, you pay and you continue to use power as long as it runs. So it's a really beautiful system that addresses this particular need. And then what we find is that as families then go up the income ladder,
Yes.
then they can now afford the bigger systems that do require a little bit. I don't know if you have solar in your home, but you see some of the bigger.
Oh yeah, I want some.
You want some? Okay.
But it's expensive.
So usually those ones require you to have your house wired, the bigger inverters, because they plug into your distribution board. So, so as families get richer, then they want those ones. But at that point, then they can get it. But right now, if they don't have any wiring in their homes, that's fine. They can use our systems.
This is very interesting, actually, what you just mentioned there, which is, and I saw it in India, and I'm sure it's the same in wherever you go in Africa. Everyone's got a phone, haven't they? Funnily enough, right? Which is really interesting, right? So if you think about this technology jump, developing nations have skipped putting telephone lines and cables and landlines. They've just not bothered. They've just gone straight to using mobiles. So if we can do that skip for phone technology, why have we not done that skip for power? It's interesting, isn't it?
It is in fact, it really explains, that goes to the heart of why I work for Sun King today.
Okay.
But my background is I'm more of a grid engineer, large scale engineer.
Okay.
I was one of those development activists that used to think solar, that's just not it, right?
No, it's not for me.
That's not giving the people where they are.
You need build big things. You're into that, yeah?
Build big things, extend the grid to everyone. Why should we, that leapfrogging? Yes, it works for mobile, but it might not work for power.
Yeah.
There's a large, group of people who still think like me, who are in government or outside of government, that really think that this is the way to stimulate economic development. It's, you build the grid, you get it out to people.
Yeah.
But I think over the last 2-3 years, after really trying to do this program at scale in my previous role for the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, where literally this was our objective to end energy poverty. And I looked at the numbers in a lot more detail than I've ever done. And I also looked at the technology, and I looked at where those connections are coming the fastest. And then I went to visit the homes that are actually benefiting from the solar. Okay, because it's one thing to look at these numbers and, as an engineer, to think of all this modeling outputs and so on and the studies. But it's another thing to actually go to someone who, like you said, never had power before, doesn't have the ability, even they do have a connection next to them, they can't afford to connect up to it. But they need lighting right now. They have a phone and they have to walk kilometers sometimes to actually go to the nearest charging station where they pay to charge their phones.
Yeah.
And they have to do all of those things. And you go to those people and then all of a sudden they get a kit that can solve their problems from day one. That's, that meets them where they are in terms of availability. And honestly, that was really seriously what was changing my mind to say, look, we need to think really differently about this. And leapfrogging is not just possible, but it's even necessary in this stage, right? We do need to focus on how we can, enough of the ideology, enough of the thinking about, what's right on some paper model. What's the reality? And what do people need right away? That was honestly really what informed me to cross over and join Sun King.
It's brilliant. Thank you for bringing that personal element to it. It's very interesting. In terms of your, if you look at what people want, right? So as in parts of, it is getting less in India, and I know India, so I can talk about it. But in Africa, it's still a big issue of people using either kerosene lamps or burning, for cooking, sort of whether it's coal or some sort of fuel mix. I can see solar as a lamp easily, right? You can see it gives you lighting. You could probably see solar helping to run a low, energy efficient small fridge. But cooking takes a lot of energy. How do you think solar in Africa can try and get people away from those kind of very toxic, firing clay ovens or whatever they're using, do you know what I mean? And get them to be able to cook. Because that is a difficult transition, isn't it? Because the energy to cook is quite a lot, isn't it?
It is, and it does go beyond what most, affordable solar home systems can do
Yeah,
right now, and they
yeah,
won't be able to get to that point where you can cook that. That requires way more power. But this is an area of research that is ongoing, and I
right.
suspect in the not too far future, as again, technology costs become, I remember 10 years ago, even the solar for just like lighting was still too expensive, like was,
Yeah, yeah.
$200 and above. Right now, they're like $40, $50. So I imagine that over time,
Mhm.
it's going to be, we're going to solve the cooking thing, or let's solve the cooking thing from the solar angle, because at some point it should become affordable. But for now, what we are doing at Sun King is we're really looking into LPG gas
Okay,
as an
right,
option for cooking,
right.
especially for many African countries, because this gas is a transition fuel. It's
Yes,
not, it's still, obviously gas and it's still
yeah,
fossil fuel. But in the African context where we're starting from a really low carbon footprint, if you compare the positive benefits of, gas cooking for households,
enormous. Yeah,
compared to the status quo, like you said. And it's not just, I mean, people use deforestation in some countries, in places like DRC in Gabon, as a result of cooking in Zambia, where I was just at last week, is incredible. Like it's really like a significant danger for climate change. Like people talk about climate change mitigation from the point of view of reducing emissions from power plants and cars. But really, the way to reduce emissions in African context right now, the majority of emissions outside of South Africa, where they have coal, majority of emissions right now is caused by deforestation. It's caused by people cutting down forests to be able to make the charcoal to sort of like cook.
yeah, yeah.
And plus, usually that cooking actually makes them sick because
Of
it
course.
causes this indoor pollution.
Yeah,
So it's a no-brainer to look at right now over the next 5, 10 years. The immediate solution we think
yeah,
as Cycling is gas cooking to provide on the side and to productivize it, right? To make it in a way that you're not, again, if you decided to wait for the grid and traditionally you say, oh, solar can do this, let's wait for the grid to come. They're still not going to have power in the next
no,
40 years.
no, exactly.
But if you think about gas delivery, just the way, solar is delivered as a product, right, with the same sort of logistics infrastructure, then we could, right now, Sun King is doing close to 400,000 solar kits every month across the world, every month across Africa. That's an incredible amount number. We think that we could get close to that with gas as well. And within a few years, you might have heard of this Mission 300
Yeah,
initiative from the World Bank. There, the target is electrification and clean cooking. We think using this upgrade model, where you use this, product type of thinking rather than a grid, we could solve the cooking issue for sure in the same way that we were solving the electricity issue.
I think it's really interesting that people probably here sitting in England, Grantham, wherever you are, and I'm in London. We don't really consider, what the challenges are for people. There you go, Mission 300, right? Which is getting 300 million people who still don't have power. That's incredible, right? You think about 300 million people.
And that's only half the total. That 300
Yeah,
million people is just half. It was like
yeah, yeah,
people felt the World Bank and it felt, okay, we can't make everything by
yeah, yeah.
2030. So let's just put half the target,
Yeah, I mean
So
I think my maths is right. That's kind of close to the population of Europe, near enough, or most of sort of Europe, right? So
yeah,
you
yeah,
suddenly
pretty
think
much.
that many people don't even just have power, and yet there's lots of lecturing going on about kind of Africa should reduce emissions, China, India, all of those places. Don't burn the coal, etc. On a wider point, and I think what you're talking about, what your company's doing is really interesting. Why do you think? What do Africans think? Because I've been only to one COP. I went to the one in Glasgow, and I met a lot of people from Africa, and they said this is just pants. They're just going to talk, right? And we're going to have to
Yeah.
find a way of doing it ourselves. And I think
Yeah.
that nothing's really changed. What do people in Africa think when they get lectures from people saying, well, you should cut your emissions? Why it's very polluting and all of that, when you just said exactly the thing that could make a massive difference to people's health, just swapping from charcoal to gas. Where do
Yeah.
Africans sit? And obviously I can't expect you to speak for all Africans, but you're in this place, you know the people, you go to these countries. What do people think about this kind of mainly Western European view of, polluting Africa?
That's a that's a big ask. Somebody to ask me to speak for all Africans, but I'm kidding. Yeah, I know
I
you're
know,
not. I know
you
you've
tell
caveated
me
it.
as
I know
as
you're
an
not. I
African.
know you're not. But no, I do. Yeah, I do have, and as you can imagine, I do have opinions about this. And especially coming from the climate sector myself, right?
Yeah, of course.
I think my first crop was in 2000, and I think it was 7 or 8. So I've been in climate space for a really long time and went in there because I grew up in Nigeria's Niger Delta oil industry. I saw firsthand just how dirty and how
Mm,
destructive method of energy was. And I thought to myself, there needs to be a better way. And then I
yeah.
went and studied environmental science and then stayed in climate. And unfortunately, I do think that, yes, it has gotten a bit too ideological, where I
Yes.
think too many climate activists have forgotten that climate change is about people, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to work for solutions and find solutions that are not just solutions in themselves, but solutions that work for the people. And yeah, in Africa, what that means right now is, Africa still needs gas for cooking. Still might need gas for industrial development, and that should be allowed. And I think increasingly they're coming around to it. But I agree with you that especially in the last, up till 2 or 3 years ago, it was getting to a point where it was really difficult to finance a gas
Yes.
deal in Africa, for
Yes.
example. Most Europeans would
Absolutely.
just say, sorry, no,
Yeah.
it's too high. And that's us coming from a really low level. And
Yeah.
I do think that that's fundamentally unfair. And in
Okay.
some ways hypocritical, because at this very moment, most Europeans cook with gas.
Of course they do. Of course they do. I've got it in my own house. Yeah. There you
Exactly.
go. Yeah.
So, what, basis can we stand and say, no, you can't cook with gas. You can't transition from coal. And when I said we're not even cooking with coal, South Africa is one
Mm,
country out of like 55 that use coal. Most of the rest is using wood that
yeah.
we cannot transfer from deforestation to use in a transition fuel
Yeah.
like gas, just to be able to cook and stop our women dying in
Yeah.
kitchens.
Yeah.
Like, it's a no-brainer to me. Like, nobody should ever push back against that kind of argument, right? And I think that people are coming around to that. It's slowly but coming around. But you're right. When I hear it, it doesn't. Yeah, let me.
It pisses you off. Good. And it
Some
should
thoughts.
do.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
well, I'm trying to be a diplomat these days, but yeah,
No, no, no.
it's
Listen.
not a nice thing to hear.
No, it's not. And this is the thing that, that's why I was very keen to get you on and hear this, because we don't hear enough about what's going on in developing nations. And they're at the forefront of climate change. And they're doing so much, right? Which is the other thing that I find really, annoying in the narrative, is that, it's all about kind of, oh, yeah, here's what, developing nations are doing and it's wonderful here. The people at the front end, they're doing a lot. They're doing tons. In fact, they're probably doing far more than other people, because they're starting at such a low base to move the dial just a little bit. Just to bring us to an end, when we talk about kind of the solar, which I said right at the beginning, and we've had that kind of journey that it was going to, do you now think it is, as you say, changing? So you will see this kind of dual thing of maybe grid build out with more renewables in Africa, but definitely more of this isolated solar that starts to bring people, connected to power, which is what we really need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do think so. I think most governments, again, are aligning with this reality. It's just look at the numbers. This is the best way to get to the most number of people in time. And look, there's always, and I like the fact that you said it's complementing each other. There's
Yeah,
always going to be a role for the grid.
yeah,
Nobody's saying that you should abandon that altogether and just deal without grid. In fact, I wrote this Substack the other day about people were arguing. There's this argument in the energy industry around which, if given that African countries, especially governments, only have so much money for electrification, where should they put the money in? Should
yeah,
they be to powering industry, or should powering households? Which is which? And some thinkers, many of them I respect in industry, have said government should really prioritize this money towards industry, because industry is what creates jobs. Forget about
economy.
households. Once
Absolutely.
once your economy grows and you have
Yeah,
enough money, then you power household.
yeah, I can
But I made the
understand that.
argument that I used to think that way as well. Again, because get the grid out, grow the economy. But the truth is, you can't have productive economies if you don't have productive people. And most of our people are still in rural areas. And they don't need that much to be productive writing. But it will help if they have lighting so they can read at night. It will help if they have access to be able to charge phones, to be able to watch TV and get educated that way. Because if they don't have that basic level of education and their capacity to engage, and by the way, the phones not only allow them to communicate, but it also allows them to transact and be part of a digital economy, right?
Yeah.
And so if they don't have that basis, if you somehow only power industry, you might not actually have the local capacity of the people to work in that industry. So I thought, and if you combine that with the fact that the cost of actually electrifying people through off-grid solar is ridiculously low. So it takes, before it used to, just to give you some numbers to close with, traditionally it costs somewhere well over $2,000 per household to be able to bring the grid to, right? Okay. And if you start to multiply that by a million people, that's 2 billion. Like that's more than the budget of most African countries. Yeah. So it was crazy that, and this explains why, these people were not getting connected, because the cost per connection is so high. When you do off-grid, and guess what? Even when you spend all that money to connect them, sometimes they still can't afford to actually connect to the grid, like you because said. Of what we talked about, right? So you spend 2,000 and yet that person is still not connected. And when they do, you can't recover your money back, because how much do they pay? How much do they earn over time? When are you going to make that 2,000 back? But if you look at off-grid solutions today, on average, governments like the government of Nigeria, like I said, they're big in actually rolling this out, and it has helped that they've decided to subsidize these systems for the poorest communities in the hardest to reach areas. And their subsidy amount is somewhere within the range of $40 to $50 per household. So what used to cost government $2,000, they can provide the same level of energy service to people for $40 to $50. And just imagine that range, just imagine that change. So my argument is under Mission 300, there's sort of like the World Bank has put together with the government like a potentially 30 billion that will be available for electrification over the next 4 or 5 years, so 2030. You could use a fraction of that, $1 billion at most to 1.5 billion, and actually electrify every poor household at that's $40 to $50 range. And they already have power tomorrow. And then you keep the rest of the money, which is still a lot, to power industry. So that way you have industrial use, but you also have productive people that can actually participate in that industry of the future that we're creating. So I think now is the time more than ever, and this requires that leapfrogging that you talked about, to actually be able to do both. Technology allows us to be able to do both. And thankfully, like I said, more and more countries, not all, but more and more governments are beginning to wise up to.
Do you know what? You should run for president. I'd vote for you.
Yeah, no, that's not like.
Listen, that's a different ballgame. Lovely. Thank you so much for enlightening me and the audience and kind of what's going on. I think it's really great stuff. I like what you're doing with Sun King. I like the model of, people don't pay, they just pay a subscription, because we need to make sure, I've always said, there's no point having a transition unless it's a just transition. So thank you for your work. I think it's really good stuff.
Thank you for having me, Summit. Really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. Thanks very much. So check out what Sun King's doing. Get in touch what you think about the solar challenge in Africa and in wider developing nations. Get in touch on social media. Remember, if you want to be on the podcast, then drop us a line, nethero@futurenetzero.com. My thanks to Zoe for production. See you on the next episode of the Net Hero podcast. Make sure you subscribe.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from futurenetzero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.